National Security Advisor Mike Flynn could be in legal trouble after it was revealed that he has lied about his communications with a Russian ambassador over economic sanctions against Russia, while discussing the possibility that once he enters the administration, those sanctions could be taken away. Flynn allegedly told Russian Ambassador Sergey Kislyak a month before President Donald Trump took office that any sanctions put in place under the Obama administration could be reversed. This communication apparently happened on the same day that those sanctions were announced. 9 anonymous current and former U.S. officials told the Washington Post that Flynn explicitly mentioned to Russian Ambassador Sergey Kislyak that they could be taken away. Two officials went further.
On MSNBC, you said that Michael Flynn enjoyed the full confidence of the president. Sean Spicer later said the president was evaluating the situation, and then Michael Flynn resigns overnight. Were you out of the loop on this?
No, not at all. Both were true. The president is very loyal. He's a very loyal person, and by night's end, Mike Flynn had decided it was best to resign. He knew he'd become a lightning rod, and he made that decision.
So had he not resigned, the president would continue with him as National Security Advisor, even though he misled the vice president and the administration about the contents of that call?
That fact is what became
Mitchell is
unsustainable,
President
actually.
Trump's counselor. Marianne, good morning to you.
Good morning, Jack.
Yesterday afternoon on MSNBC, you said that Michael Flynn enjoyed the full confidence of the president. Sean Spicer later said the president was evaluating the situation, and then Michael Flynn resigns overnight. Were you out of the loop on this?
No, not at all. Both were true. The president is very loyal. He's a very loyal person, and by night's end, Mike Flynn had decided it was best to resign. He knew he'd become a lightning rod, and he made that decision.
So had he not resigned, the president would continue with him as National Security Advisor, even though he misled the vice president and the administration about the contents of that call?
That fact is what became unsustainable, actually. I think misleading the vice president really was the key here. And I spoke with the president this morning. He asked me to speak on his behalf and to reiterate that Mike Flynn had resigned. He decided that the situation had become unsustainable for him here. And of course, the president accepted that resignation.
You're saying that was the straw that broke the camel's back, but the White House knew about that last month when the Justice Department warned the White House that Mr. Flynn, or General Flynn, had not been completely honest in characterizing that conversation with the Russian ambassador, and they even went further to say that as a result of that dishonesty, he was at risk for blackmailing by the Russians.
Well, that's one characterization, but the fact is that General Flynn continued in that position and was in the presidential daily briefings, was part of the leader calls as recently as yesterday, was there for the Prime Minister's visit from Canada yesterday, and as time wore on, obviously the situation had become unsustainable.
Marianne,
and General Flynn...
That makes no sense. Last month, the Justice Department warned the White House that General Flynn had misled them, and that as a result, he was vulnerable to blackmail. And at that moment, he still had the complete trust of the president?
Jack, I'm telling you what the president has said, which is that he accepted General Flynn's resignation and he wishes him well, and that we're moving on. And there are at least 3 candidates, very strong candidates that will be considered for a permanent position here. Obviously, General Keith Kellogg is the acting National Security Advisor starting today, and the president is moving forward.
I want to go back to that phone call with the Russian ambassador back in December. You're starting to make me think that perhaps General Kelly was not freelancing during that call when he talked about or hinted, I'm sorry, General Flynn, that he wasn't freelancing during that call, that in fact he may have been making that call on behalf of the administration or the incoming administration. Would that be accurate?
No, it would be a mistake to conclude that. Remember, in the end, it was misleading the vice president that made the situation unsustainable.
Which the White House knew about last month. And yet yesterday you went on the air and said that General Flynn had the complete and full confidence of the president.
And General Flynn decided that he should resign last night, and the president accepted that resignation. And the president is very loyal, and he's been carrying forward with his entire team very effectively, frankly. And at this stage, he accepted the resignation, and he's moving on
but
as early as...
loyalty is one thing. Keeping a guy in a position of National Security Advisor who has communicated with the Russians and then misled the administration about the contents of that communication is entirely a different thing. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, Jack, what I would tell you is the president and I had a conversation wherein he referred to the comments made by Charles Krauthammer on a different network last night, that it is not one communication or one incident necessarily. In this case, it is the misleading to the vice president and also the inability to remember. As General Flynn started to clarify his remarks and say, I can't remember, I can't recall. I think that was his clarification over the weekend. I can't recall whether or not the information that was provided to the vice president that others in the administration had repeated as well, whether or not that, in fact, was the whole truth.
Was General Flynn the right pick in the beginning?
Well, the president chose him, and that's and he, was very loyal, and he worked very hard, and he had a 30-plus year career in the military. I've talked to General Flynn on a number of occasions about that career.
But isn't it kind of surprising that with that 30-year-plus career in the military, a guy who was about in December to be named National Security Advisor would not understand or realize that phone calls with the Russian ambassador are routinely wiretapped by U.S. intelligence officials, and that anything he said on that call might come back to haunt him?
Well, you're presuming what General Flynn did or did not know. But the key here, and I want to repeat it, the key here is the misleading of the vice president and others, the incomplete information or the inability to completely recall what did or did not happen as reflected in his debriefing of particular phone calls. That really was what happened here.
All right, Marianne Mitchell, we'll leave it at that. Marianne, thanks for your time this morning.
You.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Here is the misleading of the vice president and others. The incomplete information or the inability to completely recall what did or did not happen as reflected in his debriefing of particular phone calls. That really was what happened here.
All right, Kellyanne Conway, we'll leave it at that. Kellyanne, thanks for your time this morning. I appreciate it.